Historical record holds that the first medical body snatching occurred in 1319 for a medical school in Bologna, Italy. Centuries later, the practice hit a record high in America's preeminent city for medical science. That is right, talking about Cincinnati body snatching. Tonight, we welcome back Jeff Cease, one of our favorite historians and authors, back to the show as we journey through the macabre tales of the Queen City body snatching and the shocking theft that ended it all. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our third season of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Loco, and tonight with me in the shadows, like always, are Christina Wald and Jen Kohler. They'll be on in a little while, along with Jeff. Our social media handles are at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and of course, write us in your hometown haunts and strange stories to hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. You can also join our Facebook group, Hometown Haunts, where you can chat with other spooky lovers just like you about spooky things, weird history, and all sorts of strange stuff that we dig up around here on that Facebook group. Also, we're an official podcast that can be heard wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. Find us by searching Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, and please rate and review us so other spooky lovers and weird history fanatics just like you can share the podcast. Also, for those of you who are not in Cincinnati, welcome! This is our strange and spooky show from the Queen City. Also, if you're looking for us, Cincinnati is spelled Cincinnati, because I had talked to many people outside the city and no one knew how to spell it. So there you go. That's how Cincinnati is spelled. I learned it too when I moved here. So, bringing us onto the show before Jeff comes back, I am going to bring back Christina and Jen, and we are going to talk about what fun little adventures we were on over the past few weeks. So, Jen and Christina, welcome back to the show,
Hey,
ladies.
Hi.
welcome back after how many week break? 6 week, something like that.
Was
It
it
feels
that long?
like it was longer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going, though it kind of feels like a year has gone by. Every
Mhm.
week feels like a month. So, hi.
Hi.
Hey,
How was everyone's holiday season?
it was
Good.
very nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And how was your grand adventure? Because we had talked about you were it was kind of like the Hobbit. You were about to leave your door and go on a grand adventure.
Oh,
Perhaps
yeah.
with not as many wizards and dwarfs, dwarfs, but
Just
I'm
a toddler
short,
and
so
a
I
puppy.
usually say I'm a dwarf. Dwarf. Ah. Anyway, yeah, lots of second breakfasts were had. But our grand adventure was going down the original Route 66 through Missouri and Oklahoma to go visit family who live in Oklahoma. And I got to go see, along with my husband and little one, we got to see basically a fire breathing dragon
Oh, fun.
in Illinois. We also got to see the large blue whale attraction that's on Route 66. We got to go through that.
what?
Yeah,
Where
and
is that? Because I think we must have been close to that because we
I
went through
think it's
St. Louis.
Catoosa, Oklahoma. So if you're going down 44, Route 66 parallels Route 44 through most of Oklahoma, and it's just about a half an hour out of your way, but you can just go down that, and there's so many fun little stores and basically outlet malls that are selling candy, like, ooh, so much candy. But then you have all these little side attractions. So we also saw a scale model of the Hubble telescope in
Ooh.
Marshville, Missouri, because
Ooh.
that's where Hubble is from, and a Stonehenge, a
Oh,
model Stonehenge. Now, what was the last one? Oh, Oldest Jail, I think in Missouri. Got to go peek in there. Super spooky.
ooh.
And it was also on the active sheriff's property.
Oh,
So,
really?
like, the jailhouse and the sheriff's office and the police department. I'm like, and I was like, oh, we're going to make this really quick so we're not in
Yeah,
anyone's
so
way.
be on your best behavior when you go visit the sheriff.
Yeah.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
All he saw was this red-headed hobbit jump out of a car with a camera, take a few photos very quickly, and jump back into the car with a
That's
little
good.
kid that's going, "What happened?" like that. So we were an adventurous crowd. Oh, and a dog. We brought Yeti with us because he was too young to board. Yeti does not travel well.
Oh
Aw.
no.
No. Yeti was queasy the entire
Aw.
time.
Poor
Poor little guy.
baby.
Oh,
Yes.
is there anything you could give him?
No.
Oh,
no.
We gave him everything available.
Yeah.
And what ended up working was just not feeding him. So he didn't
Poor
get
little guy.
he got fed at night
Yeah.
instead, like in the late afternoon and then again at night to kind of pace it out instead of in the morning and then at night. So yeah. So fun. Just fun.
Road trips
Yeah.
are always the biggest adventure.
I miss doing road trips. One of the things I planned on when before COVID hit, but we were talking about doing the podcast was just visiting all the strangest spooky places around Ohio and northern Kentucky. It's not something we managed to do too much. We did it with Indiana and the dollhouse graves, but I love traveling and going to interesting little places. So
Same.
it was fun. And then
Yeah.
our Christmas was very low key.
Mhm.
So we were just
After
like,
the
yeah, we're
adventure,
done.
yeah.
Yeah, we just passed out and ate strudel. So
That sounds like a good way to spend the holiday. How about you,
passed out
Jen?
eating strudel.
It was fine. I just spent it with my sister and her family.
Oh, nice.
It was low key, and her in-laws have kind of adopted me in a way since my mom has gone.
Aw.
So I knew they were going to be there for Christmas, and they gave me this. My brother-in-law's dad is an artist, so he did a screen print of his cat Cookies,
Aw.
and he gave it to me all nice and framed and everything, and it's so cute.
Aw.
So, and they are in love with their kitty. I mean,
Aw.
this kitty is like their world. Literally, it is. This cat is their world. So, anyway, that was one of the nice little surprises over Christmas. And then I've just been trying to pack up the house. And then my poor Betsy kitty hasn't been feeling well. She's okay, but she sounds bad.
Aw.
She's
That
got
wasn't her coughing just now, was it?
No, that
no.
was my husband. That's
Okay.
fine.
I was about to say she sounds
No.
rather human.
No, she is.
Troy is lurking in the shadows.
Okay.
She does got some sort of throat thing, like her throat is like inflamed, and she is swallowing hard, and she just sounds really bad, but otherwise is okay. And has a thyroid condition, so she needs to constantly be eating to stop from losing weight. But she can't eat because her throat's bothering her, and it's just been fun. But my new cat's fun.
I know. Clover, right?
Clover, Lady Clover of the Fields. She
Aw.
is sweet and sassy, loves to cuddle on her terms, which is not as much as I would like, but it's good. She hisses at Betsy anytime she sees her. And Betsy's like, I don't care. I don't care that you're here unless you're on my bed, and then I'll hiss at you because that's my bed.
Wow.
But yeah, that's my life right now. It's so boring, but it is what it is. How about you, Christina? What'd you do?
Oh, it was really, it's been a very busy break. I finished a couple of big projects, including my comic finally for, Cat was ready to kill me, and I am still alive. I was an editor's nightmare.
I'm not going to say anything.
But I did finish, and then I also finished some other projects that were fairly big over the holidays, so that was nice. One's going to be a book that's in London, and I'll talk more about it when it comes out. And just working on some other projects and just trying to sketch my next books and getting that sort of thing together. And we visited my in-laws, which they live by Lake Barkley in Kentucky. So it's really beautiful. And I was able to sketch outside this year and not get shot, because one thing, when you go down at Christmas, it's duck hunting season. And so you have to worry about getting shot. And so I was sketching there a couple of years ago, and I found this nice little beach, and I sat down, and I started hearing all this gunfire.
Oh,
And so
that's
I very
scary.
hastily made my way back, and Troy's mom proceeded to tell me, "Oh, well, it's duck hunting season. You have to be careful about, walking around so you don't get shot." But this time I went in the late afternoon, and most people hunt in the morning. So, I was able to survive that. And then we also were on part of Old Route 66 because we visited some
Yeah.
close friends in Springfield, Missouri. Actually, my friend Ioana is who's helping. One thing that I've been working on during the break is I've been wanting to do some sketching trips, and we are doing a sketching trip to Transylvania in June for 2 weeks. So we're hitting all the big cities and towns in Transylvania and sketching them. People that know me well know that I am a castle fanatic, and Romania has some wonderful castles. It's not got as much of a touristy reputation because Europe, I mean, there are so many castles. And so Romania is beautiful, especially in Transylvania, but it tends not to get the traffic of visitors just because there are so many other places. It's way east, and there are so many places in Germany and in Ireland and England that people, by the time they get to Romania, that's pretty deep Europe. But it's
Yeah.
a beautiful country. They have the most old growth forest in Europe.
Ooh.
They actually have the brown bears that are extinct everywhere else.
Oh, wow.
Ioana and I were hiking there when we were there in 2014, and sadly saw no bears, but we saw a lot of their poop. So
Well, at least you know they're there.
around.
we
Yeah.
saw lots of bear scat, but we didn't see any bears.
Man.
She is a plant biologist. Although for Christmas I got her first sketchbook, and I said, you have to maybe start sketching. And we've got a really nice group of people that are going to go in June. It should be really fun. So we've been working on that and making our plans for that. Knock on wood, we will be able to travel in June. That's the one big question mark.
Yeah. Really hoping you'll be able to travel.
Me too. I mean, everybody hopes they can travel. I mean,
Yes.
your trip to Japan has been postponed how many times?
Twice. And we're right now trying to get our tickets moved again because no one can go into Japan right now unless there's some extra circumstances, and it's basically been on lockdown. And also the COVID is just the COVID. Oh no. It's
Everybody
just,
understands.
yeah, it's just they're dealing with their own waves and variants and all that. So, but speaking of projects, Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities issue 2 is to the printers. Myself and Tim looked that over last week. It looks beautiful. It's heavy, but beautiful. And I'm very excited for it to be out in the world whenever there's enough paper. Oh my goodness. But no, it's very beautiful. The ink sat well on all the paper that we chose. Everyone, the hue saturation is just mwah, chef's kiss. All the typing came out beautifully. The tones came out beautifully. I'm all jazzed about it, folks. I'm just so jazzed about it. So
I mean, we loved issue 1, but
we love issue 1. This is a
issue
very
2 is
good
beautiful.
sibling to issue 1. It's going to give it a run for its money. So
Yeah,
we
I
all
mean,
done.
there's a lot of great stories in it. I mean, I love all the stories in it. Actually, they're really good.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited for people to get to read it.
Yeah. Reviewing the PDF, I'm just like, I'm so proud of everyone.
I
Everyone
know.
did such a great job. I feel like a really proud mama. Just like, oh, you're so great, everyone. Pat on the back. Not to sound patronizing, but yeah, everyone did a fantastic job. I'm so proud. So
and actually, yeah, next issue.
No, I was going not about the issue, but later this season, because this is a companion podcast to these comic book anthologies, we have a few different topics that we have in the works. More to come, of course. But some of the stuff that we like to investigate a little bit more is the many nicknames of the Queen City, because I've mentioned we're the Queen City. Charlotte, North Carolina would really like to fight us on that title, but We're also known as Porkopolis, and we have a few other fun nicknames in the long history that is Cincinnati. We're also going to try to talk about Lafcadio Hearn, aka Koizumi Yakumo, who is a pretty renowned compiler of Japanese ghost stories, who used to live here in the city, wrote extensively about when the Cincinnati Music Hall was being built and the burials, and he's very good with describing the decay of all the skeletons and everything that was going on. So very interesting guy, had an interesting life, and he is now buried in Tokyo. So I'm hoping that some of my friends who are our Tokyo correspondents can go visit that gravesite for us. Also, Magnetic Springs here in Ohio, more premature burials, and of course, a trove of haunted locations. So, fun stuff to
Exciting.
look forward to.
Cannot wait. And we were talking about you were putting your list together for book 3 topics.
Yes, and I'm not going to reveal it here, but we'll have it up on our website soon enough. And one reason why we're not reviewing it here is because I don't know where I put that notebook.
Well, and I hope, if you're listening to
Oops.
this and you're interested, please submit a proposal for it. I mean, really want to see your stories for this. Kat works really hard on this list, and I think that it's always an exciting thing to see what proposals come in.
Mm-hmm.
And the more, it's one of those things where people ask, will you run out of stories? And the more stories we find, the more there are. Like,
Yeah.
it's sort of like a Pandora's box.
I love it. Pandora's box of spooky, weird history.
Yeah. You just, it's like a rabbit hole you go down, and it doesn't seem to have an ending.
Yeah. And
So-
also, people who may be watching on YouTube will notice that this is a different room where I was in season 2. I flipped rooms. So my studio is in a different room in our house. So if you're wondering why Kat can't find that notebook, it's because she's misplaced it in this move. So, yeah.
So, I guess speaking of spooky tales of Cincinnati.
Yes. Tonight we welcome back our friend Jeff SUESS, historical author of so many books about the Queen City, and also a journalist for the Cincinnati Enquirer that I can't list them all out here, but you can find out more about his literary endeavors at his website, jeffsuess.com, and he's also been on a lot of previous episodes of our show. I think at least 2. Unfortunately, I couldn't look them up in time. But Jeff, you wrote a wonderful article about body snatching here in Cincinnati. It was fun. It was a great read. I loved all the historical pictures that were included as well. What got you interested in the topic of body snatching?
Well, every Halloween, I like to try to do something kind of spooky. You mentioned Lafcadio Hearn earlier. I like to write about him and different things. And this was one that there's a podcast my wife listens to all the time called Sawbones.
Oh, yeah.
And they had mentioned about this Cincinnati connection to the grave robbing. I knew about grave robbing, but this specific guy that I ended up writing about. And I've been thinking about that. And then my editor had asked about writing about the where music hall is being a Potter's Field and some of that stuff. And so I decided I didn't have much time, so I kind of put them all together into one big story. And frankly, you could write about each of those and make chapters of each of them. There's quite a bit of information.
Oh yeah, like just with the Potter's Field, the original locations of not only Potter's Field, it was an asylum, an orphanage, the Presbyterian burial ground.
Well, the Washington Park was also a great 2 different types of. There was Episcopalian and Presbyterian graveyards there, and so you have just all of that in that area, and so that's all part of the history that as they built the music hall, did the renovations, and when they redid Washington Park, a lot of those graves, unmarked graves, of course, are still under.
Oh yeah, there's only 3 headstones I think that's on display in Washington Park right now. When you're walking up, I forget which street that is. Is it?
It's Elm, and then you come up.
Yeah, because it's facing when you're looking at Cincinnati Music Hall. You can see.
Yeah, it's near that little dog park.
Yeah.
So it is on Elm.
Yeah.
Or yeah, okay.
Where that the only headstones they have on display in Washington Park right now. And it's deceiving because you just look at it and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is few bodies. No, there's probably hundreds of bodies still in there. But I know when I remember the Enquirer reporting on it when they were doing the excavations to build the parking garage, just the amount of bones that they were pulling out from there. So
Well, I did a piece several years ago about there was a guy named Joshua Wyeth who was one of the original patriots at the Boston Tea Party.
oh wow.
And in fact, he's the guy who coined the phrase Boston Tea Party because it was so secretive. They never actually talked about it until he came to Cincinnati and started talking about it. And he is buried under Washington Park. And when they decided to put the park there, they put in ads and things in the papers asking families to basically take the remains of their relatives and transfer them to Spring Grove or other cemeteries. Well, he didn't have any family still around, and a lot of the people didn't. So if nobody claimed the remains, they're still there. And that's what exactly. And so they did not have records of who was buried there. The assumption is he was there because he was Presbyterian and died in the period. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that assumption. But I know I talked to one of the historian at the library who had done a lot of research on that, and basically nothing has ever, other than the bodies they're finding, they don't really know who's under there.
Yeah, it's
behind the tombstones.
Yeah, because I know just from an anthropological standpoint, you dig up the bodies, you need to identify them, and then try to put as many bones together as you can for each person, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower, and it's not uncommon for them just to be reburied and interred, and yeah.
Well, with the music hall, when they did the last renovations, or maybe it was the one before when they were doing the elevator, and they found some bones there. I think it was the elevator one, and they ended up donating them to an anthropological study, I think at UC.
There's photos of it back from like 87, I think.
Yeah, I think
It's to be able to get human bones, even to this day, for a medical or, in my case, anthropological labs, just to be able to study what actual bone looks like. You're not looking at resin castings. It's always, I don't want to say it's a treat or a treasure, but you feel a lot of responsibility when you're looking at them, like reverence. You're like, wow, this was a part of somebody. This was somebody's jawbone. This was somebody's knee or foot. And it helps a lot with education, which is what we're stressing tonight. But the way that it was done back in the 19th century may not have been the best way to have gone around this. It does just the start and the ending and everything in between is just amazing, the stories. So I know in one of the articles that I was reading about this topic, Cincinnati was one of the preeminent medical cities in America for a while in the 19th century. We had 20 different medical schools between 1820 to the late 1800s. And then we had just a few of them through the years. I did make note of where the most prominent ones were. A lot of them were established by Dr. Daniel Drake, and then he would get kicked out of one. Also, please excuse my dogs barking in the background. And Dr. Daniel Drake would establish a medical school, get kicked out of it by the board, establish another medical school, and then get kicked out of it, then get rehired at a different school that he had already started. And this happened a lot. He was kind of everywhere. But just for our listeners, I think the main schools we'll be talking about today is the Medical College of Ohio, that later became UC's medical school. And that was on 6th Street between Vine and Race. There was the Eclectic Medicals Institute, which was on Court and Plum, the Medical Department of Miami University. There was also the Physio Medical College on 7th and Cutter. I think if I'm reading my notes correctly. And then the Medical Department of Cincinnati College, which was on 12th between Elm and Plum. I know at least with the Medical College of Ohio, they had a body chute for all these bodies to be deposited at night So, fun things. So this body snatching, why? Why was body snatching happening, Jeff?
Well, you had talked about how rare it was to get body parts for to study, and that's very much so at that time. We take for granted how much knowledge we have now, but there wasn't that much knowledge, and there wasn't an opportunity. So these medical colleges needed bodies to study, but they didn't have the setup for bodies to be like donated easily and things like that. And so they basically just looked the other way and didn't care or didn't ask questions about how they got their bodies. And they knew very well where they were getting them. They just, look the other way. And
the police also didn't care either. They all looked the other way. They're like, no, this isn't happening.
Right. You pretty much needed to be caught red-handed. And even that, it seemed, I don't know what the exact legal, but the stories that I was reading in the Inquirer and other places, they were just slapped on the wrist. I mean, the newspapers would literally say, that guy who's the well-known body snatcher. And you're like, you couldn't do that today. You can't say you're like, that guy who we all know is doing this illegal thing, but it's not getting arrested for it.
Right. Exactly. It's just amazing.
So, basically what they would have to do is find these bodies, and you need them within a certain period. You don't want something that's been buried for 10 years. You want something relatively fresh. And you think about that very much Frankenstein and that, coming out of that same time period, that was common, that these bodies would be almost intercepted right after burial or maybe even from mausoleums and things that hadn't really got there, and they would somehow get smuggled to the medical colleges in the middle of the night, and the next morning, hey, we've got a bunch of bodies for study, and it was about $10 to $20 per body, which was a lot of money in the 1850s, 1860s.
Yeah, I think one of the articles I read, it estimated it would be slightly over $800 a body they were getting.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was a lot of money back then.
But it was a lot of work too. I mean, I'm not trying to say it was simple, because it wasn't. It was not just everybody could do it. You were doing a lot of manpower, but there was a guy we'll talk about this named William Cunningham, who actually had other people working for him. So he would have, particularly, he would get a lot of other poor people. So you might get some African Americans and things that, laborers doing these jobs, and he was kind of the guy in charge.
Yeah.
So, and they needed to pull the bodies out of the ground, transport them across town, all in the dead of night.
Do you know how heavy a human body is? How difficult they are to move? Your head alone is 7 to 8 pounds. And it's just trying to carry a potato sack full of bowling balls. Because this is, in some of William Cunningham's time, it was slightly before embalming. So you have bodies decomposing actively as you're trying to carry them in rucksacks. So you've got gases happening. I'm sure many a time his own teams got freaked out by weird moanings and gases passing through the human body, oozing, smells, insect activity. All this is starting to happen within a few hours of death. So gotta work quickly, especially in those potter's fields.
Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of them were the potter's fields, because the idea was, these are people who weren't claimed or didn't have any family, and so who's going to complain about the body missing? And so what I've read about the process, in particular with William Cunningham, is that he wouldn't have to dig up the whole body the way we think of like, I have to go down 6 feet and I had to dig out this whole 6 by 6 trench or something and dig down. Instead, all they'd have to dig down to the generally the feet of the coffin, then they could smash through the lid, and then wrap a rope around the legs, and then yank them out like tied to a horse or something, and just yank the body out. So it wasn't a ceremonial nice treatment. It was the same way you would grab, a big log or something that was in your way, that you would have to pull out.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the gases and how messy it must have been, just horribly messy.
Dreadful.
Not great. And I could just imagine the medical school, the students getting the cadavers, because they really weren't kids. These are like 20, 30-year-old people in medical school. And all the postmortem breakages, like I'm sure bones popped out of flesh at some point in the process of this.
Well, they
I'm
probably
sorry,
also-
I'm grossing out everyone, aren't I?
No,
I mean, at least they weren't bleeding.
Mm.
So
they were oozing though.
they would be oozing, but you
Yeah.
know how blood coagulates after.
But they would
certain
probably
amount
just
of
use
time.
them for certain things. So, like if a
Mhm.
body were really damaged in the head, you might use it for an abdomen, or
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
So it's not. You wouldn't necessarily need the full body or whatever.
Right.
However that worked. If you don't mind, there's a couple of quotes I got from old stuff I wanted to share about, because
Oh yes.
the writing of this period is much richer than I could do justice. So William Cunningham was operated in Cincinnati around 1855 to 1871 is when he died, and he had a bunch of nicknames. He was known as Old Man Dead, the Ghoul, because Ghoul was another term, and they called these resurrectionists. That was the
Yes.
official term. You'd see that actually in the news. He was referred to as that well-known resurrectionist in Cincinnati, which is kind of a cool name actually for
Yeah.
an grave robber. But his most common nickname was Old Cunny, and it was because his name was Cunningham.
Mhm.
And Cunny was also cunning. He was really sly about how he would get out of these situations. And there was this great description that the Inquirer had. And so if you bear with me, it's one of those really long sentences with semicolons and stuff. But he said, "To have ever seen Cunningham is to retain him in your memory for a lifetime, for that ponderous yet gaunt frame, that villainous bald head fringed about with silvery gray, that strong-marked face corrugated with age and crime, a canine mouth from the corners of which slowly trickles the generous saliva, impregnated with the juices of nicotine, and that shuffling gait caused by a broken leg received from a charge of buckshot constitutes a tout ensemble sufficiently striking to make a very vivid impression."
Very
Wow.
vivid indeed. Oh my.
Wow.
That was writing in the Inquirer back in the day.
Nuh-uh.
Wow.
That seems completely unbiased.
Completely.
Why saliva? Why did it have to be described? Why?
Well,
Oh,
it seems like newspapers at that time were your entertainment too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you didn't get to watch the news
Oh,
or whatever.
you should
so-
read the old
Yeah.
murder stories. Is
yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, they were
Crazy.
exciting so that people would read it.
yeah.
I like the scandal sheets myself, but
Yeah.
that's because I'm gossipy, I guess.
Yeah,
But-
one thing where you're talking about him, and it raised some other questions, like when you were getting, say, unmarked graves and that sort of thing, were they even in a box? Did they usually, even if poor people put them in a box when they buried them?
I don't know. I think it probably went a little bit different ways. Some
I know
unmarked
that
graves.
answer.
Oh, you well,
You do?
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Jen and I love grave matters here. So it's just like, yeah. So you're looking at a large burial pit. So no, the paupers' fields, they were not put into pine boxes because that cost money. They were put into rucksacks basically and thrown into a pit. And that's how they would be decomposing, which made it a very big mess when we excavated them. And a lot of, like, at least they weren't embalmed, so you don't have chemicals leaching into the ground. Everything that was coming out at the time was el natural, so fertilizer, really. But yeah, that was. It would be only people who were formally buried where you would have them digging into a coffin, roping them, and then taking them out. Which brings me to an interesting topic that doesn't get talked about too much. And I did find it while scouring just notes on body snatching, which was Jewish bodies were also very popular to steal because in Judaism, you're buried within 3 days of dying.
Mhm.
So the problem became so persistent that the Jewish community here in Cincinnati wrote to the higher ups saying, hey guys, we need some help here. We're getting our bodies snatched. This is not good. What can we do to keep this from happening? And the man who is really responsible for kind of revolutionizing the way that the bodies were treated after death would be Rabbi Shachna, oh my goodness, Rabbi Shachna Isaacs, who was from Cincinnati, who was the local rabbi, and he ended up getting basically the Jewish community to put together a guarded mausoleum where the skeletons were, or not skeletons, the bodies, eventually it'll be skeletons, but the bodies would be housed and they were guarded for about a week or two until the bodies had decomped enough that they were no longer of use to the medical schools, and then they were given the burial that they deserved. So you started seeing families doing that as well. But that will eventually bring us to what stopped all the body snatching in 1878, but we're not there yet. All right, sorry, that was a weird historical note to go on. So, body pit.
Well, you had talked about, Cunningham and how he was very cunning and not getting captured. And some of the stories that they had in the Inquirer, and to be honest, I read a bunch of things, so I can't really remember which source it was, but because there were some books and things from the period. But there were stories of him being caught red-handed and by like police officers or private watchmen, and while he would go talk to them at like a local pub, he would have his men continue to work, and then he would buy drinks for everybody, and after like an hour later, after everybody's all liquored up and chummy, then he would go back and his men had got the bodies, and there was his day. And so, literally being caught red-handed and nobody does anything about it. The police just get, look the other way.
Didn't he also send female friends of his to funerals to scout out bodies?
Yeah, there was all sorts of that. His wife also was involved with this. She continued it even after he died. But yeah, there was all sorts of that kind of scouting. And like I said, it was very open secret. The medical community completely knew about it, but they didn't want to go on record about it. So there was a story that made it in several of the books by a local Cincinnati physician that was supposedly well known. He went, didn't want to be on the record, so we don't know who it was, but he gave a story that about one incident he remembered where Cunningham got a body and put him in clothes and sat him up on the wagon, the carriage with him. And when they would drive, it was like a Weekend at Bernie's sort of thing. And when they would pass somebody by, he would make some comment, like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like he was answering something that he had said. And I have the description here, if you don't mind a second again. It said, usually he took the body down in a buggy sitting in the seat beside him. The corpse was dressed up in an old coat, vest, and hat. He would hold the reins in his right hand while he would steady the corpse with his left hand around the waist of his silent companion. Whenever people passed, the corpse would gravitate forward and downward. Cunny would slap his inoffensive partner in the face and say to him, "Sit up! This is the last time I'm going to take you home when you get drunk." The idea of a man with a family disgracing himself in this way.
That is Weekend at Bernie's.
That's pretty clever, actually. Disturbingly so.
Yeah. Well, he was a wagon driver by day, wasn't he? Yeah. So he had the wagon available.
And he once got caught mailing a body from American Express. It was kind of like a Western Union sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the guy opened up the box and found this like a woman's body in it. And he went back to him and he's like, "You got to get rid of that body." And he's like, "Oh, is that all?" Like, "Sure, yeah, no problem. I can get rid of that." And he said that he had shipped more than 100 bodies that summer through American Express.
Yeah.
Through the mail to other medical colleges.
Yeah, that one was bound for Kansas, if I remember the account.
Yes.
Yeah. Kansas.
I found out a fun fact while listening to lore. Apparently, H.H. Holmes would sell the skeletons of his victims to.
I was going to bring up H.H. Holmes or
Yeah.
Herman Mudgett in a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
But it's
Sorry.
okay. Just like I said, we love true crime. I'm not surprised you brought up H.H. Holmes and his murder castle up in Chicago. So,
well, I wonder if he's the only one that did that. Were there had to be murders that also would sell their bodies.
I'm sure, though
the
Holmes
victims.
was really motivated by insurance fraud,
Mhm.
but that murder castle, that seems like a lot of effort, though.
It is a lot of effort. He had to deflesh them.
Yes, well, lye is very handy for that process.
Yes.
And I'm sure you all will cover this, but it sounds like the medical industry was sort of complicit in this. And I mean, what was the process? Like, how did these people get linked up with the medical community? There was before Craigslist. Was there some sort of secret network where people would somehow get a hold of these bodies? I mean, you can understand why doctors would want to see them so they could study them. And why was it illegal at the time for them to, or was it just there wasn't laws on the books at all?
I don't think there were a whole lot of laws. Well, the laws that there weren't really enforced. There wasn't until an incident that you've alluded to already that there was actually an anatomy law, a enforced anatomy law in Ohio. And frankly, I think it's just one of those things that it was considered like a necessary evil because, these were unclaimed bodies by and large, and there was still a very real need for bodies, and it just wasn't. There was no laws and things and mechanisms in place for like donating your body to science and things like that.
I did dig up a story from 1835 that kind of covers a little bit of insight what was going on. It was very much the Wild Wild West because not only did you have these resurrectionists picking up the bodies, but medical schools would be fighting each other for them. So this is an account. It is, I think, from Major Gano. He was on the board of one of these medical schools, but it's 1835. A group of college students from the medical department of Cincinnati College, plus their professor and their resurrectionist, which was the school's janitor, came to Major I forgot his first name, Gano's estate after they were shot at while digging up a corpse from the nearby potter's field. The professor had a wound around his head, and they had taken him to Major Daniel Gano's estate. While Gano and his wife actually treated the professor, the group told him of their story, and they thought that it was a competing group from the Medical College of Ohio who had shot at them. It turned out that it was actually bricklayers from the brickyard next door to the potter's field that were sick and tired of all these body snatchers and had started shooting at the students. Prior to, in the early days, basically, the students had to dig up their own bodies before the resurrectionists really kind of took over. So that is a recollection from Major Daniel Gano of body snatchers.
So that's why we have laws now.
Well,
that was 1835, right? That was way before laws, right?
So what we're dancing around is basically the John Scott Harrison case of 1878. So Jeff, would you like to share the tale?
Sure, and you can chime in with any details like this. So John Scott Harrison was the son of William Henry Harrison, 10th president, and his son was Benjamin Harrison, who would eventually become president. So he's the only son of a president and father of a president.
Mm-hmm. And U.S. House of Representatives from Ohio.
Yeah, and so when he passed away in 1878. And then, so there was a lot of family around here. Benjamin Harrison was in Washington, I think, at the time. But his John Harrison's son, because they're all like named John Harrison, So the
Diverse
son,
names.
yeah, and so they go by their middle names, but frankly, I can't remember them all. So it's so the son, John Harrison, um, one of the family friends, and let's see if I have the names here. Augustus Devon is what I have down. Had died about the same time, and the for whatever reason that I couldn't exactly figure out why, they were fear that of body snatchers there, or maybe the body had gone missing. I think the body had gone missing, and there was fear of that, and so Harrison and one of his other relatives, a cousin I think it was, went over to the medical College of Ohio to try to find this family friend body, Ben. And they went down and they found that chute that Christina, I think you mentioned, and they had this
They
whole
had a
group.
warrant, by the way, to do this.
Oh no, I didn't. And they didn't find Devon's body. I think that actually got sold to another part of the country.
Yeah,
if I remember
that was
right.
found at the University of Michigan.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And there was a whole legal thing with there.
Yeah.
But what they did find is a body that was hung up in the classroom or whatever the things there. They have this whole system, and it was like stripped with no clothes or anything, hanging there. And they looked it up, and it was his father. It was John
Whoa.
Scott Harrison, the former president's son. His
Yes.
body had been stolen. They didn't know it had been stolen, and it was hanging there. And then, of course, people with those sort of means make things happen. And once you actually have politicians involved, and the Harrisons were important, because at this point, Benjamin Harrison's, up and coming, going to be president soon. And they really forced Ohio to pass their first enforceable anatomy laws.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
And
awful.
So what was amazing about this, not only because they had basically stolen and sold the body of a U.S. representative, but also they had managed to break into a cement brick tomb, which he had been encased in when he had
Whoa.
died. And they had done it by breaking through Devon's grave, because Devon was easy to snatch because he was just in a box and they just went whoop. But then they went in and then to the side and got him.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that was the 1881. Where did that go?
So the lesson is don't steal rich people's corpses.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
Right,
unfortunately.
right.
If
Stick-
you're trying
stick
to
to
keep
the
practice
potter's field.
going. Yeah.
Oh, and Harrison's estate also levied 3 civil lawsuits against the Ohio Medical College for in total $10,000 in
Whoa.
1878 money. Unfortunately, no one knows how this resolved because the documents have mysteriously disappeared.
Ooh, that's very
So-
juicy.
Yeah, it is very juicy. It's the Ohio Anatomy Law of 1881, which was passed in Ohio, that made it legal to donate your body to medical colleges. And that became the template for the federal law that eventually came around too. So body snatching kind of
So Ohio
changed.
was an early adopter or something.
Ohio was the founding. Like everyone got their ideas from Ohio at that time.
Well,
Way to go, Ohio! Woohoo!
It's interesting because you were talking at the beginning that it was kind of a worldwide phenomenon, and when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, was that in her mind too? Because it seemed like one kind of effect of all this body snatching was fear that the doctors were doing something nefarious, like the whole story of Frankenstein assembling a body out of dead parts and reanimating that. Was that fueled by this worry of the body snatching and that sort of thing? Was this like in the urban legend pop culture of the time?
I don't remember off the top of my head when Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley.
I think it was about 1817, something like that.
Oh, so yeah, that would have been very much a thing.
Yeah.
Because I know at least with the hangings, like they would hang criminals and those bodies usually be given to medical schools. So that was not unknown. I mean, at the what was it? The article that you sent today, Christina, body snatching started for medical schools in 1319.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
very, very long history of body snatching. And I think that's one reason why we have so many urban legends of ghouls in graveyards at night. It could be to keep people away from the graveyards and cemeteries while body snatching is happening. I mean, Cunningham's nickname was the Ghoul. It'd make it really easy. Also, horror host title for Cincinnati, if I've ever heard one, is the Ghoul, if those are still a thing. But yeah, I think that was probably in our mind, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I would imagine so. That at least it's something that would have been familiar as a. I don't know if it's necessarily, how a lot of times you don't think it's a fear that everybody else has until somebody writes about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we even had the New England vampire craze after Mercy Brown died. That was in Rhode Island. I did not live that far away from her grave site. That brought on a whole new worry about what happens to bodies once you bury them. And
one thing I thought was interesting reading about this before the show was they said it's still there are still bodies that get stolen. I mean, is this kind of the source of urban legends today of waking up in the tub of ice water with your kidney missing and stuff? I mean, it seems like there is still trafficking of certain things.
Full on bodies.
Yeah.
Like there was a story not too long ago, a few years ago, of a funeral home selling to the families cremations. But the cremation didn't actually happen. They would in turn sell the bodies to conventions. I don't know what they would. But then one woman found her, once they found out about this one woman, in order to find her father, was looking through a catalog that body parts were sold to medical conventions. And she came across a photo of her dead father's decapitated head.
Yep.
So that's what happens today.
Yeah, I also shared the man suing body donation company after mother's corpse was used for bomb testing. That happened in 2019, reported by CBS News.
Yeah.
So it's just basically you have body donation companies and how they come about their bodies now. That's been
and just because you donate your body to science does not mean it goes to medical science.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, Jeff.
They had the remember those bodies exhibits used to tour?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of concern because one of the companies, as I remember, was from, I think it was from China, but I don't remember which country, and where there's not as much paperwork that actually it says, and there was a lot of concern about where those bodies came from, whether they were like homeless people or something, that whether they had actually donated their bodies or not. And I know that was a big civil or like a human rights concern. And some cities, they were protested for that very, very reason.
Yeah.
Did any of you go see it when it was here?
I did.
Yeah, I did.
I saw it in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Or
It
one of
upset
them. I found it really fascinating, but you've heard me talk about how people were buried. So, it also the similar concept wigs, human hair wigs, where some of that hair is also harvested is an equal question if it's always ethically harvested or not. So it's interesting how this has never really gone away, but it's evolved with the times, and really makes you think where things are sourced. Not just where your food comes from, but now where your wigs come from, and how, like, I know when we're looking through, and we talked about this earlier, just medical schools now, where your bodies are coming from. And going back to Herman Mudgett, talking about medical schools. So, Jen, do you want to talk about H.H. Holmes and how he got his bodies?
I think he married a couple women. Some of them were guests at his hotel or worked for him. And he would just somehow wiggle his way in there and get insurance policies on them and then kill them. And then I guess he decided at some point to sell the skeletons because he could make money doing that. Because they never found his victims' bodies, did they?
So it depends on what victim you're talking about.
Okay.
So I'm going to be honest, him marrying the women is new to me because I've never actually heard him marrying anybody except for his wife that he left in Vermont with their son. So,
that could be wrong. I mean, I
so
don't retain facts like you do. But
well,
I mean, definitely.
if it's this, yes.
Yeah.
If it's other topics, such as anything that has to do with a math equation, it falls out my head immediately. So hold on that praise.
But yeah, it was definitely people just that were in his.
Yeah.
And especially if they happen to drop, I have no family. They don't know I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of background. He was originally from the East Coast. He went to medical school at the University of Michigan. They don't like admitting that, but yes, he was a trained doctor and surgeon. His original name was Howard Mudgett, Herman Mudgett, and I think his son was named Howard. And what he did was insurance fraud across the entire United States. So we're not going to talk about those, but it was the killing of the Faisal children that actually got him thrown in jail in Missouri and eventually executed. But during the World's Fair, 1896, he built this lavish castle that was a hotel. And guests that he thought were certainly appealing, a lot of single women, would stay there. And just about every room was booby-trapped so that the women would be gassed and their bodies deposited down a body chute that would go into the basement, and where their body would fall into a vat of lye. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a very good way of removing the fat and tissue and sinew off of human bone. Then what he would do for $80 a pop is sell the medical skeletons to universities around the United States and Europe. So, and also parts of North America. We're not leaving you out, Canada. You bought human skeletons too. So he made a lot of money doing that, but it had to be a very quick enterprise. He eventually left the murder castle. I can't say if he left bodies in the basement or not. That doesn't sound like him. But when he did get discovered on, I think, following year with the murder of the Faisal children, the locals burnt down the murder castle and now it's a post office.
Oh, really?
Could you imagine if it still existed?
Oh, no.
Oh my God.
I mean, they also burnt down the Faisal cottage in Indianapolis where he killed the kids, one of the kids. So,
and talking about talking about the art aspect of studying anatomy, Gray's Anatomy was illustrated and written in the 1800s, and was very controversial at first, wasn't it, when it first came out? Obviously, like Leonardo da Vinci got in huge trouble for doing sketches of dissected body parts and stuff because it was very inappropriate. You had to kind of getting a hold of stuff to draw. But the Gray's Anatomy book, which was illustrated in the 1800s, is so accurate that it's still in print.
Yeah.
And
I have a copy of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very detailed illustrations of, they had to do lots of dissections. And I believe, and I'll have to look this up and talk about it on a future show. I believe it was a bit controversial at first, having someone draw from dissections.
That
I
don't know.
It sounds like it would make sense because, frankly, all of that stuff was controversial at some point.
Yeah. But it was a huge use for learning what different parts were like. I mean, I that's the thing that's so fascinating is that, it was so hard to find out. I mean, we have all this knowledge today, but
because of it.
At that time, it was so hard to get this sort of thing. And it's crazy that it was so nefarious to be able to get access to these sorts of things.
Well, and I guess it goes along with how people would view death, and if your loved one was still really in there after they died, and now it's kind of like, your soul goes on and your body's just your body. So who knows? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to. My mom used to say all the time she wanted her body donated to science because of her emphysema. And she was a nurse, so she would have been fine with that. But it always made me uneasy. I'm like, it doesn't mean they're gonna study your lungs, mother. You know,
Right.
and it's just, yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Well, remember that this was the time where bodies were still laid out in the family home. You have a lot of
Mhm.
death
Yeah.
traditions about covering mirrors, covering windows,
Mhm.
which direction the body would be removed from the house from, like
Oh wow.
by the head, by the foot, north, south, east, or west, like what time of day. You have a lot of traditions about treating the deceased at this time. And I mean,
Yeah.
still do, but
Yeah.
And those kind of death photographs, that's kind of
Mhm.
interesting, where they would set them up, do family portraits and
Mhm.
things
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
And death masks used to be a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think I saw a death mask of Bela Lugosi in an oddity shop here in Loveland.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
was just like,
That's random.
it was totally random. I'm like, I hope he consented to that, but I'm pretty sure he didn't.
Yeah. Well,
You know.
that's just the beginning of Madame Tussauds museum is the death masks done in
Mhm.
France, how she trained to do that.
Oh,
So
okay. I
Weren't
didn't
there
know
a
Maria,
lot,
that.
as I recall, weren't there a lot of the nobles and things that had been beheaded during the French Revolution? Were the
yes,
earliest?
she did the death masks of a lot of the nobles that were executed during the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And
That's how
that's
her
just
training.
because photography wasn't invented yet.
Right.
yeah, Marie Antoinette was one of the first death
Really?
masks from Madame Tussauds. Yeah, we went
Oh,
to
cool.
when I went to London. I think this was my first trip back in I think it was in 91. I talked my mom into going to the Madame Tussauds museum, and she thought it was a really terrible idea because she thought it was just a sensationalized junk museum to go to, but then she found it really interesting when we went because
It's
Yeah.
so
it did
cool.
have such an interesting history, and
Mhm.
how Madame Tussauds had started it, and
Mhm.
it had a lot of like you said, really old stuff and death masks of really well-known. I mean, I obviously now they don't do death masks, they do sculptures, but
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I
it's a
forget
fascinating
who it
place.
is. It's I think a deceased noble woman who is the death mask for Sleeping Beauty, one of the first
Really?
Trousseau wax figures done. She's still on display. At
Oh,
least she
wow.
was when I saw her. And she's dressed up in a French Rococo dress, lounging on a chaise lounge. And she's just like, blah, like that. But it's a very young woman who, when you
Aw.
realize that that is a corpse's face that you're staring at, and
Yeah.
then you start going, oh, okay.
I think the same with the CPR dummy, right? Didn't we talk about that?
Yeah, we did talk about the CPR dummy. Yes, that is also a death mask.
Is
From
it
like
really? We might have
Mhm.
talked about it, but it didn't stick to my
last
memory.
season, like
Yeah.
I probably purged that one. Where it's like I don't want to know that.
Well, I
yeah,
don't think it's the face for all of them now, but
no,
at one point in time it was.
yeah,
And
that
so
universal.
effectively we've all made out with the dead person.
Well,
I'm remembering
now,
now a little bit more about that discussion that we had before. But it's just an interesting, how it seems like in research and stuff, how it's always been a struggle to be able to research. It always has. I mean, there was a show, I don't know if anyone here ever watched it, called Dark Matters, that was on the Science Channel, and it was hosted by the actor that played Denethor in the movies. What is his name? He played Denethor in Lord of the Rings, or
Mm.
Return of the King, and he was also on Fringe. I don't know if anyone watched that show here.
Oh,
The
I used to
actor,
watch Fringe, the old guy that
yeah, he
played the
was that.
oh,
doctor.
that
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, he
Yeah. Yeah.
hosted this show
Yeah.
called Dark Matters, and it was basically about scientists doing developing their hypotheses in rather unethical ways.
Yeah.
Like, for
Mhm.
example, they covered like Pavlov, who did Pavlov's dogs, and how he did experiments on children, and a lot of times,
Mhm.
like when they were trying, like how they found out how rickets, which was a vitamin deficiency, and how some of these scientists kind of, and that kind of, it was an interesting show because it was really, they would show scenes reenacted with these scientists, and then they would have it was all done on green screen, and then the backgrounds were put on but slightly askew, so it was
Oh.
kind of a really weird. You could watch some of the shows on, and they probably did do some shows on, getting cadavers and that sort of thing, because it was really hard to you have a hypothesis, but it's really
Right.
hard to prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some of these doctors would
I
do
don't
tests on themselves, even like they'd inject themselves with things. And
Mhm.
I don't think we'd be as advanced now if we had done everything ethically. We wouldn't know half the
yeah.
stuff we know.
Well, ethical has changed its
Well, that's true.
definition over time. But the thing to take away from this is the amount of medical history that is bore on the backs of those who couldn't speak for themselves,
Yeah.
You're right.
minority groups that couldn't speak for themselves, people who were put into the potter's graves certainly couldn't, and neither could their families. So we really wouldn't be where we are today without that. And it's a very sad realization when you realize that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So my heart goes out to all the families, like probably my own, let's be honest. I wouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised if a few of them were in the potter's graves at some point.
I think everybody
But
has family that would have
yeah,
been.
yeah.
There was an interesting story in Wired a couple years ago about this brain surgeon that was sure that he'd figured out how to attach leads. Anyone that liked cyberpunk in the 90s remembers drawing all the little people with ports in their heads
Oh
and
yes.
like jacking in and stuff. I did a lot of cyberpunk artwork. I actually did artwork for cyberpunk and Shadowrun. So I remember drawing lots of ports on people and tattoos and stuff like that. But this doctor, and this was fairly recently, like in the last 10 years, he was sure he figured out how to attach electrodes to your brain to boost it the way they've always like done in fantasy and science fiction. And so he decided to do the surgery on himself because he could not get obviously someone to volunteer. And so he went down to South America and had them put, like, he invented this like power box that you had to put in, and like all these wires go to his brain. And not only did it not work, but he almost lost his ability to talk because it did the brain damage it did. And he finally had everything removed, but they couldn't remove some of the leads that were going, because it would cause more damage doing surgery again to get them out of his brain than to just leave them there. Kind of like how sometimes they leave shrapnel in with certain types of wounds. But the thing that was interesting about it was, and you would think as a doctor he would have realized this, but when you put anything in the human body, like say electrodes, where you have some sort of firm, hardware, your body doesn't want it there and immediately tries to get rid of it. And your brain is kind of like a jello mass. So when you try to put electrodes into jello, your body immediately is fighting it and trying to get rid of it. And it didn't work the way he'd hoped. But I guess it shows how much you could be wrong with a hypothesis when you're trying to figure something out. It was a really interesting story.
Mhm.
And did he come out okay? Like,
he did. He survived and was actually doing surgery again. Which,
nope.
Okay.
I don't know
He
if I
should have
put this
lost his
up.
license for that.
But sometimes I guess you could be so sure that I could do this and it will heal people.
Mhm.
Aw.
It was an interesting story. It was an interesting conceit.
Yeah.
And a brief history of cyberpunk. Since Matrix just came out, so we kind of are
The
segueing.
new movie.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting. I did artwork for Netrunner when it came out with Wizards of the Coast, and I sold a piece a couple of years ago, and the guy that bought it said, "Wow, this is quintessential 90s cyberpunk art." And I was like, yeah, it was done in the 90s.
Yep.
Wow.
And it was for cyber. Of course it was.
Wow.
It had like the electrodes and all the yellow and black like line work that you put in to fill everything. What do you call that? Like caution tape on everything.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Back
Okay,
in the
now you're
day.
going to have to post a picture of it if you have one.
I do have someone. I'll see if I
Okay.
can find it somewhere.
No.
But it's just interesting. Talking about like this, how the fears of society, like when you look at horror movies and stuff, are kind of sometimes like this sort of stuff gone awry.
Yeah.
Like Frankenstein and like
Yeah. I found 2 notes that I made from
Yes.
little things just to wrap up here. With Cunny, he was mad one day at one of the universities for, I guess, stiffing him on some money. Haha, fun.
Pun
And
intended.
so he sent a corpse that had died of smallpox to the university, and some of the students got sick.
Oh my god, that's evil.
It's so evil.
So how long? That's an interesting question. Like, how often did these grave robbers get sick? Like, how often are these sorts of diseased bodies contagious?
Well, he died of a heart attack, but not before selling his own body to the Ohio Medical College for $50.
Huh.
He died in 1871.
So it's like his inheritance for his family.
Well, I guess that's kind of, I mean, it's not okay that he did what he did, but at least he kind of put his money where his mouth is and gave his
Yeah.
body.
Well, they defleshed him and fully
Mhm.
articulated his body, and it stayed in display there with a trowel in hand and a pipe in his mouth.
Whoa.
Indiana University did the same thing to a gorilla. So,
That's kind of like putting the heads on spikes to
yeah.
warn
Well,
everybody.
he
from-
requested it, though.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
So
And also, body snatching was so widespread that Spring Grove Cemetery had installed a jail in their administrative building.
wow, that is a great factoid.
Is that
Yep.
still there?
I had no idea. That is a
Oh.
question for our local docent.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll have to ask. Have you heard anything also, Jeff, about that? Like the prison for the
No, that's the first I've heard of that. Spring
Yeah.
Grove, but so much of Spring Grove is original stuff is still
Mhm.
around, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised. It's probably if they have it, it's like a closet or something.
Probably.
Yeah.
Laundry room, bathroom, maybe.
well,
The
that's
size of a coffin.
what
Well,
year
no,
did,
this is a jail, so.
what
Well,
year did Phineas Gage die? Because remember, like his skull is on display. He was somebody that contributed a lot to brain research and frontal lobe research because he's the person that survived when a spike went through his head.
mm,
And when was that?
I don't know.
I'm looking it up right now. So, he died in 1860
I
at the
knew it
age
was
of
the
36. So, yeah, his the poor man lost an eye, but yeah, he is
Did they leave this spike in?
yes, according to the medical sketch that I'm staring at right now of his skull.
Wow.
So, it looks like they did not leave the spike in for the rest of his life. No.
Oh, okay.
So it looks like after he died, there are
They
a
put it
few
back.
great photos of him quite alive holding the spike. So, and then there's a medical diagram of his skull and they inserted it back in.
Mhm.
So,
Oof.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
and then
so
we can go all about medical museums and everything, but first I'd love to say thank you, Jeff, for joining us today.
this
Thanks
has
for
been a
having me.
really interesting talk.
Yeah.
I miss your face, Jeff, since
Wow.
I don't get to see you at
Yeah,
work
me
all the
too.
time.
I know it's been 2 years now.
I know.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I know.
So for our listeners, if you like to catch up on more Jeff stuff, you have the wonderful book, is it Hidden History of Cincinnati or Cincinnati Hidden History?
Hidden History of Cincinnati.
There we go. It's sitting on my table downstairs right now. And then you have a bunch of other books. What other books?
My most recent Cincinnati one was Cincinnati: An Illustrated Timeline, which covers everything from the early, Indian mounds up to Fiona.
Aw,
Everything
Wow,
between.
that is quite
that's a lot.
quite a timeline.
Yeah.
It covers a range. And then I had Lost Cincinnati about old buildings, and then and now with where it's like pictures of what used to be and what's there now.
Mhm.
And some of them surprising that haven't changed as much. So that's always kind of an interesting revelation because we think about we turned over all these old buildings in Cincinnati, and it turns out actually there's quite a bit of old ones
Yeah,
we don't think about.
right. Yeah, there's a few. Like one that I just saw was oh my goodness, it's at the Cincinnati Zoo. It's the safari refreshment stand that was built originally in like the 50s as a different restaurant, and the zoo just encroached on it, I guess. And then now it is, because it was built outside the zoo, and then the property just encroached on it, took it over, and now it's a refreshment stand near the railroad.
Really?
I also write regularly for the Inquirer, and in fact today I had a story about Washington Platform.
Yes, that's
And,
right.
Is it just closed?
Yeah, just closed at the end of
Aw.
December. And I went back through the city directories and stuff and tried to some of the information that was out there wasn't entirely 100% accurate, and so I went back to find as much source material as I could to find out, and it's interesting connection to an unsolved murder.
Ooh.
Really?
Ooh.
So you guys can read about
Ooh.
that, and then we can go back and talk about it later.
Maybe
Yes,
that could be
future
another
episode.
show. Yeah, future episode. Excellent.
Gonna note that one. All right. So,
And your latest book.
yeah.
Yeah, then I have a new book on called Tomorrowland: The Past, Present, and Future of Disney's Most Changed Land. So it's a completely different connection thing there. And so it's kind of a history of we don't think about when Disneyland first opened in 1955, Tomorrowland, the vision of the future was, space travel and all these things, but that actually hadn't existed yet. It was 57 when Sputnik went up. And so it was Tomorrowland and some of the Disney shows that actually kind of trained the American public to even be aware of the space program. And it was really influential in getting NASA set up and everything. So that was kind of interesting. And then the idea of what happens when the present catches up to the future. The original Tomorrowland was supposed to be the far future of 1986.
Wow.
Where we're supposed to have moon, daily trips to the moon and like passenger trips to the moon.
Yeah. And they use that tech now for one of the Star Wars rides, the Journey to the Moon ride from 1955.
Well, all the stuff's been redone, but the concept of it, is pretty much with the Star Wars rides and stuff. But then audio animatronics being invented through there, and Disney was really a huge visionary, and we think of him as this he was this TV guy or just a host, or maybe you think of him as some sort of old conservative 50s media mogul, and it's no, he was really a visionary that saw things like monorails, and he was constantly trying to better the future. And to some degree, it's our society's failure to live up to his vision why these things didn't actually reach out. He'd been pushing for the monorail in LA, and Ray Bradbury was another advocate. He was a friend of his, and they would try to get LA to get this monorail system, and LA just said, no, we're fine with freeways, and missed out on an opportunity. And hit Epcot. His original plan for Epcot was actually a prototype city. It was going to be a planned city. It wasn't going to be an amusement park. It was a whole new way of living.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
That is.
Yeah, and I have the copy on my. I've started reading it. I have a copy on my nightstand, so I've been reading it. But it's very cool.
And I know I mentioned your website at the beginning of this show. Do you have any social media people can follow you at, Jeff?
I mean, that's pretty much Facebook. I'm on there, but
and bookmark every single article on the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Yeah, so I do a weekly column at the Enquirer, which is on Cincinnati.com. So that's the way to find me. And anybody who's got interesting things, they can always reach me through the Enquirer or through the website. And there you go.
Thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Learn all about body snatching. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another fascinating episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Cloco, and along with me are Jen Kohler and Christina Wald. Every single week, we plan to bring you something new and interesting about the wonderfully strange city that we live in, Cincinnati, Ohio. So you can follow us at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram. You can join our Facebook group at Hometown Haunts, and also we'd love to hear your hometown haunts from no matter where in the world you're located. We want to hear your stories of the strange and spooky, and you can send that to hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. By doing so, you give us permission to read it out on air for everyone to feast their ears on strange and spooky news from your neck of the woods. So thank you again. Have a wonderfully spooky week. Good night and stay weird. Bye.